Hello and welcome to By the Book. I'm your host, Joe Hebert. Today we continue our course on truth, justice, and leadership with the discussion of St. Thomas Aquinas. In previous episodes, we talked about the relationship between faith and reason, and in particular, why and how Aquinas argues that we can and should argue or reason about matters of faith. We looked at his views on the ultimate or last end of human life, which is universal and shared among all human beings, and which we call happiness. And we looked at his views on to what extent is happiness possible in this life versus the next life. And then finally, we turned to look at his concept of good and evil, and particularly how he defines the good as what preserves and perfects a particular being within its own nature. And therefore, to understand the good for human beings, we have to delve into human nature itself. And we looked at an article in which he does give a breakdown of what are the fundamental components of human nature and how does this point to the fundamental goods of human life. They have to do with the preservation of our biological being and health. They have to do with the perpetuation of the human species. But above all and highest of all, they have to do with the perfection of our intellectual and moral and social capacities. So our capacity to know the truth, our capacity to interact in a just and truthful manner with one another. And these are the principles or the beginning points of ethics for Aquinas. The principle, the beginning, is also the end or the goal. So happiness would be perfectly fulfilling all of these aspects of our nature, being in perfect physical health, being in perfect relation to the species as a whole and one's ancestors and descendants and so forth, and then finally possessing the truth, ultimately the truth about God Himself, and sharing that with others and sharing all these goods with others. So this, admittedly, of course, is just a sketch of what happiness would look like, either on earth or in heaven. It's not trying to fill in all the specifics, because natural law, which is what he's talking about there, is simply our innate knowledge of you could say, the outline of what makes things good. So as we get into his ethics, what we're going to see is the task for individuals in terms of living an ethical life is to take that schematic knowledge that we have of the good and to fill in those details through our actions and our habits and the way that we actually live the life that we build through our actions. And likewise with the community and justice and the common good, the community is aiming at facilitating that good life for each of its members, which also is a life that's lived in common with one another. Nobody can live a happy life all by himself. And so those relationships through which we build this happy life is part of what has to be individually pursued, but also has to be regulated by the community itself. So as we get into Aquinas' ethics, we'll see that his discussion of ethics, as with the Socratics, is driven by the concepts of virtue and vice. Virtue is a good habit, a habit by which we do good things. A vice is a bad habit or a habit by which we do bad things. But before we get into his breakdown and his analysis of what is a virtue, what is a vice, what are some of the key virtues and vices that we want to be aware of as we're striving for a good life, we want to look at some of the building blocks. And if we look at what exactly makes for a virtue, what are the components of a virtue, in a sense, we could say that every virtue is simply living in accordance with reason. Going back to Aristotle, deriving this from Plato and Socrates, the notion of virtue is that through reason we can understand the order of things, we understand the nature of things, we understand what is therefore good, and choosing to do that and habitually having the ability to see that and do that is what we mean by virtue. So every virtue is going to be a rational choice of what is good in the particular circumstances that where the virtue applies. But there's another component to human nature that we have to think about. We saw this when Aquinas in the natural law section was talking about how our natural inclinations are a key to the natural law. Even though the natural law is a function of reason, it is the rule of reason within us, but this does not exclude inclination or passion. And this is a common misunderstanding of Socratic virtue, is that somehow reason is supposed to suppress passions because passions are bad and they mislead us. Well, it's absolutely true that passions, on a regular basis, passions can and do mislead us. If you think about the arc of human life, we always start as infants, and then we're toddlers, and then we're, older and older. If you think about, the passions of an infant or a toddler or a young child, and what happens if none of those passions are ever regulated or even suppressed, that could be literally deadly, right? So from our earliest experience, we realize that passion can destroy us. It can harm us. So we easily fall into that trap of thinking that virtue is basically suppressing passion. But this is not true to Socrates or Plato or Aristotle or Aquinas, any of what I would call the sort of mainstream Socratic philosophers. They're not trying to suppress passion. And we have to understand that passion is a kind of power. It's a kind of force. So think about it like, surfing. I'm not a surfer, so I'm just making this up. But how do you surf? Obviously, when the wave comes in, this is a tremendous amount of power and force. And so there's two possibilities here. One is that you're going to hit that wave in just the right way with the right balance and the right technique, in which case all that power and force is going to go into holding you up and creating this wonderful experience of riding that wave. But if anything is just a little bit off, then you know what's going to happen. All that force and all that power is going to come crashing down on you, and it's not going to be a good experience. So that's the reason why passions are such an important thing in Socratic ethics, because they are tremendously powerful. They're not always, of course, fired up at full throttle, but you never quite know when that's going to happen. And so practicing virtue, most of the virtues deal with one kind of passion or another. And so most of these virtues have this component of sort of like riding the wave. There's this tremendously powerful force. And if you get it right, you can use this to do good things. But if you get it wrong, it will completely destroy whatever might be good in the moment or the situation or the action that you're doing. So passions can be destructive, but in their essence, they are part of the design of human nature. And so they're fundamentally good. They're good if they're in the right place, just like anything else. If it's in the right place, in the right context, in the right way, then it's a good thing. So the regulation of passions is not primarily an intellectual thing. It's primarily something we have to do by experience. And Aristotle stresses, for example, that you just don't go to toddlers and little kids and start reasoning with them. How do you control your passions? It has to be an experiential thing. But by the time you get to adulthood, then you can start reasoning about, okay, why is it that passions could be good or bad, and what's the difference? So for a fully mature person, there's an aspect of this which is kind of like riding a bike, which is that you don't necessarily have to think about it. But there also is a part that you do think about. So when you get on the bike, you're thinking, okay, where am I going? And you are thinking, maybe to some extent, I'm not going to do any wacky maneuvers. I'm going to make sure that I get there in a safe manner. So for passions, it's useful to philosophize about them and to think about what is the purpose of passions. And in the article we're going to look at here, distinguishing two different types of passions. This comes from Plato, from Socrates, primarily in Plato's Republic. Socrates goes into great detail about these two different types of passion. And in the Greek, the terms they're strong, but fairly clear. There's erotic passions and there's thubotic passions. In the Latin, this turns into some really tongue-twisting terms. So in Latin, the erotic passions are called concupiscible, or concupiscence, being the noun there. And the thumotic passions are translated as irascible. So in the English translations that you may find out there, the question here would be, whether the passions of the concupiscible part are different from those of the irascible part. But in my translation, I'm trying to bring this, back into English, into something that is fairly straightforward. Of course, there's a complexity to what these things are, but we don't necessarily need to obscure it with the terminology. So I'm translating the concupiscible or the erotic as the desiring part, and the irascible or the thumotic as the spirited part. And as we look at this, we'll talk about exactly what those mean and what the different range of things. But the question that Aquinas is raising here, the technical question is, are these things the same or are they different? And of course they are different, but he's going to entertain some objections where some people might think maybe the distinction is unnecessary. But in explaining how and why they're distinct, he's also going to explain what they are and why they're important. And this will give us a very significant foundation for thinking about ethics, because again, most of the virtues and vices we're going to look at are going to deal with the desiring passions or the spirited passions, and are going to try to regulate and steer them, trying to ride that wave with these things. So we want to know what they are and why do we have them? Why are they important? Why are they actually necessary and good if they're used in the right way? So the first objection, again, dealing with the more technical question of are these distinct or not? It would seem that the same passions are in the spirited and the desiring parts. For the philosopher Aristotle says in the Ethics that the passions of the soul are those emotions which are followed by joy or sorrow. But joy and sorrow are in the desiring part. Now, why is that? As we'll see in a minute, the whole nature of desire, what we mean by desire, is we desire things that are good. Now, sometimes we may desire bad things, but that means that there's a contradiction within us, because by nature, what it means to desire something is to reach out for it as if it's good. So if I desire something bad, that's a misfiring. There's a misfiring in my nature. So joy and sorrow, of course, are how we respond to the presence or the absence of the good. We rejoice at the good, we sorrow when we lose it. So he's saying that the whole logic of passion is around desire. We desire what's good, we rejoice when we have it, we lament when we don't have it. Therefore, all the passions are in the desiring part, and not some in the spirited, others in the desiring. So in other words, there's no use for this concept of the spirited part, because passion per se is all about good and bad, and that's what desire is desiring the good, desire to avoid the bad. So the challenge would be, well, what's different about the spirited part? And one reason this objection is important is to really hammer down that just as we saw, ethics is fundamentally about the good. Happiness is about achieving the good with perfection. So passion, the reason passion is important is because it orientates us towards the good. And it will be true that even the spirited passions are subordinate to the concept of the good. If we understand properly, all passion is about the good. But as we'll see, the spirited part relates to the good in a somewhat different way than the desiring part does. The second objection is very interesting. For one thing, this is bringing into matters of faith. So we can see that Aquinas is citing the gospel, and he's citing commentary on the gospel by St. Jerome, the church father and the translator of Scripture. So here we're seeing that in divine revelation and faith, there is a strong overlap, because the same parts of the soul, the same distinction between the types of desires and how they relate to reason that we see in Plato and Aristotle is seen in the church fathers and how they interpret the gospel. They interpret the gospel as being addressed within a framework, you could say within this Platonic framework of the human soul. So the words of St. Matthew, the kingdom of heaven is like to leaven. This is, of course, Christ speaking there, giving a parable. St. Jerome, in commenting, says we should have prudence in the reason. So we'll get to the specific virtues later, but obviously virtue, as noted, is driven by reason. We want to perfect our reasoning, which could be called prudence. Hatred of vice in the spirited faculty. So now we're starting to see what is the characteristic of spirited passion, which is negative. It's a negative passion. It's an oppositional passion. We hate vice. We want to avoid it. Okay, and finally, desire of virtue in the desiring part. So this is, by the way, is going to be the template that Aquinas will use. This is a good template. This is coming from St. Jerome, and it's mirroring what we would see in Plato and Aristotle, which is the virtuous, person is one who perfects reason through prudence or wisdom, and who also perfects the spirited and desiring passions by using the negative passion of spiritedness against what is bad and using the positive desire for what is good. But there's a technical problem that comes in here with the objection. Hatred is in the desiring faculty, as also is love, of which it is the contrary, as is stated in the topics. Therefore, the same passion is in the desiring and the spirited faculties. So the objector is saying, okay, yeah, there's a positive negative thing between desire and spiritedness, but it's still ultimately about the same thing. We desire the good, we hate what's bad. So it's not really a fundamental distinction. It's just the flip side of the coin. And this is mostly true, but as we'll see, there's a little bit, there's a bit of a piece missing here, which Aquinas will bring in just a moment. And the third objection is really just drawing our attention to what was implicit in the first two, actually, which is that all of the passions just revolve around good and evil. But it's saying you should really categorize things by their objects, by their goals. And so if the object or the goal of passions is good and evil, then there really is no other distinction to make in the passions. There's only one type of passion. They all have the same basic object. So Aquinas is, he's not going to deny most of what is in these objections, but he is going to have a different interpretation of how we categorize, the passions and why we would categorize them, which I think is very significant. He says that the acts of the different powers differ in species. For instance, to see and to hear. So if you think about it, when we're seeing something and we're hearing it, we might be seeing and hearing the same thing. So, I'm doing some bird watching and I hear the little trill and I look and I see the bird. Well, the object is the same. It's the bird. I'm hearing the bird. I'm seeing the bird. So this, deals with the third objection that if you have one object, then there's only one way of relating to it. As a matter of fact, we have, 5 senses, right? So we know that there's multiple ways that we can relate to the same thing. I can see it, I can smell it, I can hear it, I can feel it, I can taste it. So it's not true that that doesn't mean that hearing is the same thing as seeing, right? These are different powers. So this is telling us what kind of a thing passions are. They're powers. So desiring something or having a spirited response to something is analogous to seeing or hearing. It's different ways of sort of actively engaging with the things that are out there. And so the spirit and the desiring are two powers into which the sensitive appetite is divided. Therefore, since the passions are movements of the sensitive appetite, the passions of the spirited faculty are specifically distinct from those of the desiring part. So they're distinct as powers. There are abilities to do something, and that's what's really important, at this point to see about passions. Why do we have passions? They could easily mislead us. They can easily destroy things. But there's a reason that they exist, which is that they are capacities or abilities to actually do or accomplish something in the world. And there's a reason that we have passion in addition to reason. And Aquinas associates it here with a sensitive appetite. There's also the intellectual appetite, which is the will, when simply through reason and intellect we choose and decide something without necessarily consulting feelings, right? But there's also this sensitive appetite. So since we are physical beings, we have a sensory, sensible way of experiencing things, and we have a will or appetite which is connected to that. And it's not something to suppress, because as we'll see, it serves a fundamental purpose. And as long as we know what that purpose is and we're using it for the right purpose, then it's something to actually harness and utilize as part of a good life. So in his answer, Aquinas says, yes, there is a difference in the object. So going back to our example of, say, like bird watching, in a sense, there's only one object, the bird, but in another sense, you could break it down and say, well, there is, the visible appearance of the bird, there's the sound of the bird. If you were to touch it, there would be, the tactile. So there's different aspects of it, in other words, that the different powers can deal with. And so that's the way he's going to handle this, is that there's different aspects of the good and evil. And that's why we have two different types of passion that deal with good and evil, because there's two different facets of good and evil that have to be dealt with in a different way, and we have powers that enable us to do that. So in order to discern which passions are in the spirited and which in the desiring, we must take the object of each of these powers. For we have stated earlier that the object of the desiring power is sensible good or evil, simply apprehended as such. So yes, desire and hatred, as you said before, relate to the good and evil directly speaking. If something is good, I desire it. If it's bad, I hate it. I want to avoid it, which causes pleasure or pain. And we saw before joy or sorrow. So again, we rejoice in the good, we sorrow over evil. But since the soul must of necessity experience difficulty or struggle at times, now this is important because it's not true of any possible rational being, right? Angels and God don't have to struggle. So this is part of our human nature, that we are made with the ability to know what's good and do what's good, but often it is difficult for us. And what difference does that make? Well, he says, because of this, in acquiring some such good or avoiding some such evil, it may be difficult, insofar as such good or evil is more than our animal nature can easily acquire or avoid. Therefore, this very good or evil, inasmuch as it is of an arduous or difficult nature, is the object of the spirited faculty. So we'll see in a moment the rest of this answer here, but what this becomes definitive of what spiritedness is all about. Spiritedness is a negative emotion, but it's not hatred. And Saint Jerome had used that term, but Aquinas is going to say it was a little bit imprecise, because spiritedness is not about hating something. That's more the flip side of desire. I desire it, or I hate it. I love or hate it. But spiritedness is about embracing a challenge. That's what spiritedness is. Because if you think about it, to embrace something as good is different from embracing a challenge, which itself is not good, right? I mean, a challenge is an obstacle to a good. But why would you embrace the challenge? You embrace the challenge because by embracing it, you could eventually overcome it. And the harder the challenge is, then of course, the harder it is to actually overcome it. But it doesn't mean you need less spiritedness. It means you need more spiritedness. So spiritedness is the passion by which we overcome obstacles to the good. And if we just wanted the good, we just desired the good and we hated not having the good, then when things get difficult, what would we do? We would be in sorrowing all the time. We would just be, oh, I can't have it. I can't achieve the good. And we would be kind of paralyzed that way. So this is why we have spiritedness, because spiritedness is saying, wait a minute, there's another option other than just enjoying the good or lamenting that I don't have the good. There's something else, which is I can embrace the challenge and I can try to overcome the obstacles to the good. Right? So this is what spiritedness is all about. Therefore, whatever passions regard good or evil absolutely belong to the desiring power. When we just think about good or bad in itself, then we desire, or we don't, if it's bad. And this is where joy and sorrow, love, hatred, and such like passions come in. Whereas those passions which regard good or bad as arduous through being difficult to obtain or avoid belong to the spirited faculty, such as daring, fear, hope, and the like. So if you see with daring and hope, these are a positive application of spiritedness. Now, again, spiritedness has a sort of negative, connotation, but it's important to see that the negativity of spiritedness is in a good cause. It's when you take a risk for a good reason, or when you maintain hope even though things are not going well, but you are hopeful because you see that with perseverance, with overcoming challenges can be overcome. The opposite, of course, of failure of spirited passion would be fear or despair or things like that. When you just give up and you think, I'm conquered, I'm just going to suffer this evil. There's nothing I can do about it. So we can see here what is so crucial about these things. First of all, that passions, like reason, are orientating us towards the good. A proper, healthy desires for what is good, just as by reason we can understand what is good. Spiritedness is also about the good, but in a very peculiar way, because the good is often difficult. It's often arduous. And so if we simply focused on reasoning and desiring, we'd be missing something, which is how on earth are we going to achieve that? Right? It's not going to come easy. If we didn't have a fighting spirit, we didn't have a part of us that is just willing to struggle, willing to go through, because it's, the point is that struggles, the harder they are, the more painful they're going to be. So from a desiring point of view, we couldn't desire that. From a desiring passion, we would say that's painful, that's not good. It's not good to have to suffer. But from a thumatic or spirited point of view, irascible point of view, we could say, well, some suffering can be good if it is in the service of a greater good. It's a sacrifice then, right? It's something we're sacrificing for a higher good. So this is a very great power. This is an absolutely essential power, and it's something that you can easily see when people have a high level of virtue and they accomplish great things. There's no way they would be doing that without the spiritedness, without the ability to overcome challenges and to embrace the risks and the pains and the struggles through the passion that enables us to push through those things towards what is good. So in responding to the first objection, which is that all the passions relate to joy and sorrow, therefore they're all desiring passions, Aquinas says, well, the purpose of the spirited passions is to overcome the obstacles that hinder the desire from achieving what it desires, which is the good. And it's either because some good is difficult to achieve or because some evil is hard to avoid. Either way, the desire will be thwarted without the spiritedness being able to push through that challenge. So this means ultimately that the spirited passions are trying to clear the way for the desiring passions. So there's a good that I can't have, but if I struggle hard enough, eventually I can have it. Or there's an evil that's hard to avoid, but if I fight hard enough, I can eventually fend it off. Then it will eventually result in the desiring passions. And if I succeed, it will be good. I'll have what's good. I'll be joyful. But if in my spiritedness, if I fail, ultimately, then I'll be sad. So the ultimate, purpose of the spirited um, comes back around into the desiring. In this sense, the desiring passions are primary, and the spirited passions are subservient or subsidiary to that. But that doesn't mean that they're not distinct, and it doesn't mean that they're not important and even essential for reasons that we've already mentioned. Second, as noted, Jerome is using the term hatred, which properly belongs to the desiring faculty, but he is trying to conjure up the struggle, which is what belongs to the spirited faculty. So it's really just a terminological thing. And what we have to understand is what makes that spirited part distinct is that it engages the struggle, which from a desiring point of view would not really make any sense. But from more of a long-term view, it makes sense. Reason can certainly see why that would be useful, but from a passionate point of view, we need to have a passion that can like immediately grasp that. Okay, this is the time to fight. This is the time to, stand strong. We have to have a passion to enable us to do that with the same force that we would have of actually embracing something that is good. So the third objection I just kind of summarized, it's all about good and evil. Therefore, we don't need anything beyond, desire. Um, and we've already seen the answer, but Aquinas spells it out in a helpful way here. That as much as the good is delightful, it moves us to desire it, and so that's not a problem if we have desire. But if it proves difficult to obtain, what happens exactly? It has a certain contrariety to desiring power. So the very difficulty, I see something, oh, that looks good, but then I realize, oh, it's difficult. Well, my desiring power is going to peter out at that point. I don't desire it because it's difficult, right? So if I didn't have another power that said, oh, but that's a challenge. I desire challenges. I actually have a capacity to embrace challenges. Then my desire would be futile, basically, when it comes to anything hard. Now the same applies to evil. How would that appear? Well, there's something good, but it's blocked by an evil, or there's an evil that's threatening a good that I have. For example, like sickness is threatening my health or something like that. And again, just from the desiring part, all I would say is, oh, that's bad, that's horrible. I'm just gonna lament it, right? I'm just going to sorrow in this. And if there's something I could be doing about it, that doesn't help me too much. So again, I need a power that's able to say, hey, okay, there's a challenge, there's a problem, but this part of me likes problems. This part of me likes challenges. This is an opportunity to overcome. And this is the spirited faculty. That's what it's all about. That's why we have the spirited faculty, so we can relish challenges, so we can embrace, problems and actually work through them. Consequently, the desiring passions are specifically different from the spirited passions. So again, the technical question here was just differentiating them, but the real reason for focusing on this here is to see, first of all, that the passions are not there to be suppressed. The passions are there to be harnessed, because just as reason can say that we want to understand what is good and we want to choose what is good, but in our physical biological nature, we need to have some kind of motivation. We got to get the flesh moving towards something. And so on the positive side, this is desire. I identify this as good. I see this as good. I desire it. Like that actually fuels and motivates whatever it takes to obtain and to enjoy that good thing. But as Aquinas noted, in human life, because of human nature and the circumstances of human life, many good things are either threatened by destruction, or they're not. We can't even obtain them at all without going through negative experiences, if you will, experiences which in themselves are negative. But the very reframing of something, from a problem to a challenge, is already kind of saying, well, what appears to be negative is actually just a step towards something good. And so, again, rationally, we can see that. But what part of us, in terms of the sensible side, the sensory side of human nature, is going to kick in there? And this is the thumonic, the spirited passions. And so we can all appreciate this in our lives, that when things get difficult, if we sink into despair, we sink into hopelessness, then it's not helping us to work through or to accomplish anything. But it is therefore a tremendous gift and help for us to have a part of our nature that says, hey, this is what I'm here for. I'm here to actually deal with things like this. And in a certain sense, even though it's immediately bad, on the surface bad, it can actually be perceived as good or enjoyable. I mean, that's a whole nother question we could get into, is how pleasant or unpleasant are these struggles. Obviously, the hardest struggles are not really pleasant at all, but still having a side of us which is built for that means we can get a certain satisfaction and fulfillment, and above all, have the actual drive and the actual force to be able to deal with things as necessary. So this, we're talking about human nature, of course, but we've already seen that grace perfects nature and does not eliminate it. And the allusion to hope as one of the virtues of spiritedness shows us that it's not just the natural virtues or the virtues that we can practice by nature, but also the supernatural virtues, the virtues that God will infuse into us by supernatural grace, are also going to fit into these categories. So we'll have supernatural virtues of desire, supernatural virtues of spiritedness, because that is our nature, which is being perfected by grace.